thanks everybody for, all the things that you have said no to in order to say yes to this whole convening, and certainly to this particular, breakout. And I want to, really acknowledge and honor all the work that's made it possible for y'all to be together in this way, and just all the incredible examples of pivoting and adapting that you all are doing to have still a meaningful way of coming together, even if you can't be in physical shared space in the same way that the member gathering usually provides. And thanks for having me. I want to take a moment to acknowledge, to the best of my ability, the lands that I am inhabiting right now: Okanichi, Saponi, Adoshacher, and Skakori lands, stolen, appropriated. And if you want to make a similar acknowledgement, you are invited to do that. You could speak the words out loud in your own space, or you could unmute yourself and also take the time or put it in the chat just to take a moment. And if you don't know the names, that's okay. You can still take a moment and just honor and recognize to the best of your ability. So thank you. I'm going to share my screen now for my presentation. And I've been doing a lot of, as you probably all have as well, a lot of just like life on Zoom. And so I have found that some people really like the PowerPoints and some people don't. So this is a great reminder to just, engage whatever way is helpful for you. I'm sure you all can get a copy of these slides if you would want that. So there's no need to try to capture this all down unless, taking notes or some other way of engaging with it is helpful for you. And I also want to note that while I am bilingual, I primarily do interpreting, which is spoken. So I've done the translations myself on these slides. So any, problems or errors, blame them on me. They're fully my own. Translation is very different than interpreting. And I'm really good at one, I think, and really not good at the other. So, and the reason that happened is because I was behind on getting my slides. SVA put tons of effort and energy into getting the stuff translated. I just was behind the stick, so so that's on me. By way of welcome, I want to just remind you that everything here is optional. It's an invitation, and you are strongly encouraged to participate at the level of your own comfort, your own capacity, your own sort of interest and desire. And so I want to start with just some kind of continuing to arrive, and Jen just led us in a process that's very similar to this. So if you want to reacquaint yourself, or maybe you've been doing this practice for a long time, in sort of the somatic lineage that I come from, we talk about this as arriving, as orienting, as tracking. So we're going to unpack those terms a little bit later, but just for now, it's an invitation to adjust yourself to the current conditions, right? So you might not have moved physically very much, but you're in a different cohort of people. And even so, your nervous system kind of needs to adapt to that and adjust to that. So you can give yourself some time for that to happen. And that might include, again, some looking around, some noticing your physical surroundings, and maybe taking a moment to intentionally welcome in some sensory information. So what you might see, you might hear, what you might smell, what you might be able to engage with through touch or even taste. And then if it feels okay for you, you might go through this kind of intentional tracking, which is prompted here on the screen. So tracking is just trying to be aware of what's going on inside yourself. So that might feel okay for you to do right now, or it might not. If you're interested, you can sort of follow along, noticing your breath. And you don't have to do anything differently to your breath. You don't have to assert any influence on it. Just see if you're able to just observe it, notice it. And And your breath can itself offer a lot of sensory information. There's usually some physical movement that goes on with the breath, sound maybe. And if you're noticing the breath and you're noticing that it's not like a pleasant thing to notice your breath, then you are encouraged to take your attention somewhere else. And continuing here, you might next notice the sensations that are present for you. So just anything that you can feel at the level of felt sensation. So that might be noticing your body as it connects with the chair or the floor or the bed that you're on. And then as you're noticing sensations, see if you can let yourself notice things that are pleasant or neutral. Our attention will naturally be drawn to the things that feel uncomfortable or unpleasant. And there's a really good survival strategy in that. So that's nothing to be ashamed of or to try to repress. It's just also really survival oriented to see if we can connect with something that feels okay or even neutral. So anything in your system or anything around you that you can be aware of that feels pleasant or neutral. And maybe challenge yourself to try to describe those sensations to your own self. What's that sensation like? How do you know it's pleasant or neutral? And then bring your attention back to your breath. And just notice what you notice for another moment or two. And then this part again is optional, it's an invitation. I would love for you to drop into the chat if you are interested and drop 1 to 3 words about how you're doing, what you notice right in this moment, and everything is welcome. There's no, wrong sensation or wrong feeling. And of course, this is invitational. So if you're interested in doing it, you can drop into the chat and just say a few words, 1 to 3 words about how you're doing. Yeah, we've got some tired, sleepy, absolutely, some physical discomfort, some curiosity. So all of it's welcome, and you're encouraged to continue to draw on, the sort of resourcing we've done here at the beginning, the resourcing that Jen led us through, or anything around you, again, in your immediate environment. And I know that SVA sent along some goodie bags. So I think some of you, or maybe all of you, have like an essential oil blend, or maybe you have other, herbs, just like a bowl of, just for me, a bowl of Tulsi is kind of like my go-to. I'm obsessed with Tulsi, but anything that's going to help you just, again, stay present, stay with it. And we're going to continue resourcing for another couple minutes. And again, I'm going to pack what resourcing means in a second, but just briefly, resourcing is just an active practice that tries to connect you with something that helps you feel a little bit more in the present, a little bit more able to tap into your, complex thinking, creativity, problem solving, the prefrontal cortex, if you will, that helps you really take full advantage of all your resources. So that's what resourcing is. I'm going to continue with that for another moment. In this one, there's just an invitation to think about a time in the last day, or maybe it's a little longer time, maybe it's a couple days, in the recent past for you, when you've felt most like yourself. So calling on a memory of an experience, a moment when you felt most like yourself or most like the self that you want to be, that you're trying to put into practice. And again, just really kind of expand and broaden that memory. So start to bring it forth as if you were talking to someone you love and trust about it, just describing it. I was really feeling most like myself when this was happening, and this is how I felt. So really focusing on that felt sense experience of that. And just noticing whatever you notice about what happens as you do that. In the present moment, as you call on a memory of feeling most like yourself, how is it impacting you in this moment to recall that? And then to just deepen that resourcing a little bit, just some questions for reflection for you. What would it be like if you moved from this place more often, this place of feeling like yourself, this place of feeling resourced or more resourced? And if you have a journal, you like to take notes, I encourage you, take any notes that are helpful for you, or draw pictures or whatever helps you engage with this. What does it make possible for you to feel resourced, to feel centered, to feel oriented to the present? What does it actually give you access to? What does it change about how you engage with your internal and external environment? And what happens when you can take a moment, like we've done here, to slow down, to pause and feel, to gather more information before responding or acting? And so again, this might be useful reflection for you at some point. Again, you'll get a copy of this if that's helpful. I want to thank you all for whatever extent of that you engage with. Any kind of participation is participation, right? So whatever you did, thank you for that. And I just want to review a little bit vocab. So for me, one of the things I do is I'm a therapist. I'm a somatic therapist, and I come to therapy from a really long time in movement work and popular education and other things. And I really, really believe in trying to democratize information as much as possible. So pretty much whatever I learn, I'm doing as much as I can immediately to share it out with my clients who I work with the folks who come to my yoga classes, whatever space I can, I'm like sharing it, you know, from my lens, right? So it's limited, it's informed by all the things that shape me. It's not a perfect representation of this information, but it's really, I feel passionate about it, so I share it in that spirit. So I'm offering you some vocab, which may or may not work for you, but maybe it's just a start or a continuation of a conversation, and then you can grapple with how you experience these things in yourself and cultivate your own language that works for you. But just to help us all kind of be having a similar conversation maybe. Arriving is what we've done a couple of times now, just taking a moment to let yourself arrive, adapt and adjust your current surroundings. We're not going to spend a ton of time today kind of going into depth about the nervous system, because that's just hard to do with a little bit of time, and it's already in you. It's like it's embodied information that you have, but it's just a reminder that every time a transition happens of any kind, anytime you move from one room to the next, even if it's a Zoom room, every time you leave your dwelling place and go out into the world, especially right now, your nervous system is just having to process all of that sensory information, and its sole purpose is trying to assess for your safety, to figure out, is this safe enough or is this okay enough for me? So every time we pivot, our nervous system is doing that for us, whether we realize it or not. So giving ourselves a little time to arrive is just appreciating that and recognizing that. And as much as we can sort of stretch out those transition moments, build in a lot of buffers, give ourselves time to kind of catch up, it's just going to help us, again, feel more resourced and have better access to all of our beautiful brain and body powers. And then centering is, you know, I think we could all describe it our own ways. For me, it's just like being more inside of myself, being more inside my own experience, placing the center of the focus and attention inside of me. And so a lot of times, because of the things we've experienced individually and collectively due to our identities, our lived experiences, our social locations, et cetera, there's a lot of really important and essential reasons why our center is outside of ourselves, right? Because it's about orienting to threat. So if we're orienting to very real threats, whether it's you know, an abusive person in our household or a fucking cop or whoever it is, like we need to know what those people are doing so we can kind of assess our safety and our action based on that, right? So there's very survival oriented reasons why we might not feel quote unquote centered in ourselves in every moment. And we can make choices that allow us to more fully inhabit, if possible, our own experience so that we can be moving from our own center and responding to the current conditions that we're actually experiencing. And then orienting, we've done this. It's just taking in information, respecting the human animal part of us. We've said that a lot, so I don't need to belabor it, hopefully. Tracking is just that practice of really trying to notice what's going on, and there's no wrong way to do it. So any and all information that you can get from your body about what's happening for you is good information. And then resourcing, anything that helps us feel more grounded, centered, and present. So why is all this connected to, you know, the survival school? To me, it goes back to those questions of what it makes possible for us to be in kind of ongoing dialogue with our immediate lived experience and our surroundings. That's going to help us respond to what's actually happening, right? So again, we're not going to go deep into like trauma response or trauma physiology, but my belief is that we all are operating from some amount of trauma physiology. And trauma to me is anything that overwhelms our capacity to cope. It's like too much, too fast. So it's really not about, you know, anything that's wrong with us. It's just like we got too much, you know, like somebody opened a floodgate and we just weren't ready for it, right? For all the reasons. And so we can become increasingly aware of how that's showing up for us. We can recognize that conditions are going to continue to shift and that we can take responsibility as much as possible for knowing our own response systems and trying to be, you know, as prepared as possible for what might come by staying as centered, as grounded, as oriented as possible. When we are not in the present, where are we? And if we're not in the present, the choices we might be making may not make as much sense, right? They just may not be the right way to respond to what's actually happening. And this is what may or may not be happening, for example, if someone's being triggered, quote unquote, you know, and I say quotes because just everybody has a different understanding of what that means. But generally speaking, if we're triggered, we are taken into some other place or time, and how we respond to that other place or time might not be the best response to what's actually happening, right? So the other important thing about this, here's my soapbox moment, just, you know, spoiler alert is my soapbox moment. The other thing about this is that a lot of times when we start to get into this realm of like, you know, mindfulness, present moment awareness, like even self-care conversations, I have like some icky feelings about. But a lot of times that comes into like popular consciousness as like, oh, if you come into the present moment, you'll be relaxed, right? Just take a couple deep breaths, come into the present, you'll feel better, right? And I'm like, that's some bullshit. There's a lot of good reasons why we might not be wanting to orient to the present. And I want to respect the hell out of that. And again, validate the hell out of that. And I also want to say, if we're not in the present, we cannot respond to what's actually happening as well. So it's like, it sucks sometimes. It's fucking hard to do. Like, I get it to the extent that I can for myself and for any and all of you, I get it. And if we are not in the present, we cannot respond to what's actually happening. And sometimes, of course, that response means rage. That response means a hard no. That response means strong fucking barriers and boundaries. That doesn't mean we are relaxed and peaceful all the time. Hell no. But if we're in the present, we can respond appropriately. So the responding into the present, not reacting, right? To an echo of what was. So this is super important in any kind of response to disaster or recovery, right? In any kind of dynamic reality that's changing all the time. We know this, right? From lots of different examples and experiences right now, we know this. We are having to continuously orient to reality over and over. And every time it's like, holy shit, something else, we got to take time to do that. So the more we're doing that in an ongoing way, the more kind of up to date we'll be with that. So that's my soapbox. Hopefully it's the last one. So here's just what I mean when I say somatics and self-care. Again, we went around about whether to even say self-care. I think self-care is useful just because I think it mostly signals to everybody sort of what we're talking about. It's not the languaging that I use, but you know, I can just do another workshop about that if you want to engage with me around it. But we all know the problems with self-care, right? It's been commodified. It's a very individualistic way of looking at, you know, how we care for ourselves. It sort of puts on each of us as an individual the problems that we have, instead of recognizing that, you know, again, however we're responding individually is a natural response to traumatic and overwhelming conditions. And at the same time, we do have ultimately some amount of responsibility for how we're navigating these conditions personally, because nobody else can make some of these decisions for us, right? So to me, when I say somatics, what I mean is anything related to the body, you know, and somatic practices help us connect to and get information from our bodies, which are incredible sources of information around a number of different things, including how safe or not safe we are in the moment, and what our survival impulses are telling us about how do we get ourselves closer to safety, right? Which is something we don't do just for ourselves, right? We are also doing that for and with other people. And then self-care, you know, my little political orientation is self-care, the ability to attend to and maintain physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. Right? So a holistic, comprehensive understanding of what health and wellness are, and attending to it in an ongoing way, entering yourself in your decision, acting in your own best interest, which I know is like probably like a super privileged white person way of framing that. And I also come from a lot of like codependence, and I come from a lot of like caretaking. You know, anybody who's been socialized as a woman in this country and culture probably have some amount of unlearning around caretaking to do, or like caretaking at all costs, you know, to do. So to me, I think it is radical and revolutionary to come back to myself and center myself to some extent in my decisions. It's also placing boundaries, and it's also prioritizing whatever we understand as resilience. So I want to pivot to some tools. And I want to encourage you to take a moment. It's actually probably a really good thing that this session isn't being interpreted, because I talk hella fast, and I'm also an interpreter, and I know what it's like to interpret for people like me. So maybe next time I can just do it in Spanish, if there is a next time, you know, we can just go back and forth that way. But yeah, I get super fired up about this. And right now where we're at in the arc of the movement, as far as I have seen, it's like usually this conversation is given about 40 minutes, right? It's like, hey, teach us all the stuff about somatic self-care, resilience, etc. Here you have 40 minutes, which is great, right? I'm not complaining. It's just like, also there's a challenge there for me, because I'm like, this is very depthful. This is ancient. This is amazing. And also it's already in you. So it's a good reminder for me to just keep trying to trust that. But like, this is just little twinkling stars in a galaxy that you're already familiar with. So here's just some hopefully pretty concrete tools that I would offer as ways to begin to or continue to involve somatic orientation to whatever you're doing, right? So the first thing we've already talked about, slow down, pause, whenever possible. And the reason that this is super important is because the nervous system, you know, its primary thing, keeping us safe. And anytime something different happens, right? So transition of any kind, the nervous system, what it does is it recognizes difference. Right? It's literally what it does. It's like, whatever is your normal, anything outside of that or different than that is going to get a rise out of your system. Your system is going to be saying, this is different. I don't know what this is. Is this okay? Right? So anytime that's happening, we're going to have what we might call activation or extra energy in our system, kind of revving us up, especially in actually pervasively life-threatening or dangerous situations. Our nervous system is going to be doing that probably a fair amount. What that means is that there's energy in our system its purpose is to get us to safety, right? This is the fight flight thing, right? So there's all this energy, and it's literally about get your ass to safety. But all this energy is here, and we can't act yet, or we don't know what action to take yet. We're going to have this like really intense thing happening in our system. There's all this energy that wants to move, and we don't know where to put it. So we get to learn to recognize when that's happening and just slow things down when we can, right? To recognize like, what's the next right move? It doesn't mean we're not going to act, right? We are going to act. It's just like, can we slow things down enough to figure out what is the next right move with the information I have? Because if we're moving only from survival physiology, all of our good, juicy, discerning, creative brain, and I keep doing this because it's the prefrontal cortex, it's the last part of the brain to develop and the first part to go offline. All of that is not as available if we are just trapped in survival response. So this is just honestly, this is strategic. It's like if I am just reacting all the time, I might not be making the best choice. So just from a purely strategic position, when and how can I slow down? Pause and do some of the stuff that Jen led us through, you know, the grounding, the centering, the connecting to roots, the calling on resource, the calling on the legacies of survival, whatever it is that helps us just like catch up a little bit with the moment. So reconnecting to ground and center, all of that. Connecting, so self-regulation, which is something that has come up a little bit. Again, these are just terms that may or may not work for you. These are just some terms that are out there. Self-regulation is just what you can do to try to keep yourself as inside your responsive zone as possible. And then co-regulation, which is an essential part of our human wiring, is that we do this in relationships. You know, this is why we always say the first response to, you know, crisis is to orient to someone else, you know, is the caretaking, is the, you know, all hands on deck, somebody's hurt, let's come together. Like all these things, that is one of the reasons why the virus is so hard right now, is because we are thwarted in our ability to express those natural human urges to show up for people physically, to use that activation in our system, to move sandbags, to support the levee, you know, or to like dig out a pile of rubble or whatever the situation is. We're not getting to do that in the same way. So all that extra activation is just kind of in there, right? And also the co-regulation isn't as possible because in order to keep each other safe physically, we've got to maintain the social distance, which is just a really strange kind of quagmire for our system to navigate. But there's still ways to do it, and we're finding more all the time, right? And then assessing the scene, right? So just slowing down enough to get more information, figure out what's next. This is not rocket science. I'm sure it's not new. It's just a reminder for you. And then make a grounded and informed choice about what to do next, as much as that's possible. So I made this graphic. This picture in the middle I got from Blue Ridge Public Radio. And I created this graphic around it. And basically just like, you don't need me to tell you, but this is just like a, you know, a limited representation of some of the things that are acting on us and threatening our survival as communities, right? And it's not a direct translation with each one. Some are in English and some are in Spanish, but the ones that are in Spanish say economic exploitation, rising tide of fascism, prison industrial complex, violent repression of protests, poverty, Islamophobia, and then the English one, systemic racism, COVID, militarization of ICE and law enforcement, gentrification, right? So these are just some things. And if you want to put in the chat a couple of other things, the reason that I'm bringing this in is because I'm wanting to invite us to bring together these realities, right? Like we know these things are acting on us and influencing us. And then how do we connect that directly to the resourcing in real time? So even as you think about some of these things and the impacts they have on you, on your people, on communities that you love and care about, and communities you don't even know, what happens? What do you notice about your own survival physiology, your own hard wiring that's about keeping you safe? What do you notice? And again, this might be a moment to do a little bit of tracking if that feels okay for you. And it also might be a moment to call on some resource. And one thing that can be super supportive is self-touch. So a hand on the heart is a way to just presence yourself a little bit. You could also do some containing self-touch. So this is just another tool I want to offer you, a takeaway. Containing self-touch is literally using your own hands to kind of gently sort of squeeze, hug, offer a little compression that can connect you with your sense of solidity. Also engaging some of your nerve endings that might help you just feel a little bit more present in your body. Thanks. Cool. So now I want to ask you to stay with resource and bring these two realities together. So what would happen if you brought together this reality of these, forces that are pressing down upon us, exploiting us, harming us, taking our people, all the things, and you tried to bring some of these practices, or I'm not assuming you don't already do it, so I'm just reminding you of these or inviting you to consider expanding them. Well, what happened if in the face of gentrification, in the face of police killing Black people and brown people and other folks, in the face of militarization of ICE and law enforcement, all these things, what would happen if our regular response was to slow down when we could, to take in more information, to connect to ground and center, to self-regulate and co-regulate as much as possible, to assess for safety, and to make as grounded and informed a choice as possible about what to do next. How to leverage that powerful survival energy that is arising. So how do we do that? Well, through practice. We do it through practice. We do it through literally practicing in as often as we can so that these things become more second nature. Right? They become more available. It's like one of my teachers would say, it's like, this teacher comes from a spiritual lineage. So she uses the word God, but she's like, it's like having God on speed dial. When you're going over the cliff, you want to know who to call, right? You want to have that person readily available, right? So this is like our version of having, God, having resource, having resilience on speed dial. It's like, how do we get this stuff so it's so available to us that it becomes truly second nature, that it becomes truly the way we move through all circumstances, not just the super stressful and hard ones, which maybe is most of the circumstances we actually are in right now. So this is an invitation for you to, again, take a moment to do a little bit of reflection. And again, you probably already know this stuff, but it's just a reminder for you. What do you need to practice in your daily life? This is another way of thinking of this is sort of like, what are your non-negotiables? What are you doing when you're at your best, right? Like, what are the things, right? It's like 3 meals a day or, 2 meals a day, whatever it is. It's a gallon of water, it's 8 hours of sleep, whatever those things are. Just really call them forth for yourself, because again, you're the one who gets to ensure as much as possible that those things happen, right? If you don't set that intention, nobody else really is going to do it for you. This is what's inside your domain to try to control for yourself. What are those things? For me, it's time with my plants. It's walking the dog. It is definitely water. Again, I'm sure you know what these things are, but I just want to invite you to really call them in and organize them in a way for yourself so that when I'm doing these things, this is the best me that I can be. I don't get to do them all the time, and that's okay. I don't really need to, right? My teacher would say health is habit. So it's the cumulative effect of what we spend most of our time doing. What are you spending most of your time doing? And are you good with that, or can you shift that? So making sure I fill in the blank helps me be my best. Yeah, thank you for putting some stuff into the chat, folks. Drinking water, massaging my feet, walking, a lot of drinking water, moving the body, paying attention to breath. Yeah, so if you want to share, happy to really invite that, or just make a note for yourself, or just, again, visualize and invite that in at the level of resourcing. And so you know, just like that, our time is pretty much up. The way I want it to end is to just take a moment, and as you're doing that reflection and you're calling on the things that are non-negotiable for you, maybe you're writing them down. Is just to, again, go back to maybe this resourcing practice and start to imagine, you know, or remember what life is like for you when you're doing these things consistently. What does it make possible for you? What are your relationships like? How in alignment can you be with your own values? And letting your actions and your values kind of converge as much as possible. How much is that happening for you when you're doing what you know you need to do? What does it make possible for you in your work or your efforts, however you define those? Yeah. Just again, noticing what you notice as you call on this kind of, my therapist would say, calling on your health, right? When your health is talking, when your health is choosing. You might say spirit, or you might say your highest self, however you understand that or experience that. Notice what happens when you just let that part of you kind of have a little bit more airtime, take up a little bit more bandwidth. And just to kind of wrap up my part of the framing on this, we're almost done. Thanks for all the time checks. Here's what I think about all this. If you haven't already gotten an earful of that already, here's how I would summarize all this. You are your greatest resource, right? That's what all this points to. You are the resource, right? And everything that you can do to ensure that you are as available, as present, as online, as nourished, as fueled as possible is gonna help you tap into any other resource that happens, right? The solid hub, I mean, that's what this is about. You're at the center of your hub, you know, and every person you know, and every tool and practice that's out there that you've ever learned or done or you want to do, unless you're fully in yourself, you can't access that stuff as well. You know, maybe well enough, and that's fine, but we're about more